when the Coast Guard called me at 2 a.m., asking why my boat, the Silver Compass, was spotted 3 miles offshore, with 15 strangers blasting music and dancing on the stern. I thought it was a prank. "I'm sorry, what?" I said, sitting straight up in the dark, still wrecked from a red-eye back from a work conference in Denver. "Sir," the officer said, his voice flat and professional, "your registered vessel was just boarded. No life vests, unlicensed alcohol distribution, and not one person on board has a valid boating license. We need you at the marina. Now." I threw on jeans, grabbed my keys, and drove through empty streets with my heart slamming the whole way. My boat. I had locked her up myself before leaving, docked at my private slip behind a coded security gate. Nobody should have been within 50 feet of her. By the time I got to the marina, the Silver Compass was tied at the dock, with Coast Guard lights strobing blue and red across her white hull. Officers were still questioning a crowd of partygoers in cocktail dresses and pressed polos, strangers, every one of them. And then I saw her, standing rigidly with her arms crossed and her silver blonde hair backlit by the dock lights. Margaret Holloway, president of the Bayside Harbor Residential Association, mid-50s, permanently pursed lips, and the self-appointed supreme authority of our waterfront community. I walked straight to the lead officer. "That's my boat, Nathan Cole. I didn't authorize any of this." The officer raised an eyebrow and tilted his head toward Margaret. "You know her? She runs our homeowners association," I said. "What the hell happened?" He sighed and held up a clipboard. "They claimed the HOA had jurisdiction over the dock properties and could authorize recreational use for community events." I stared at him. "That is not even remotely true." Margaret finally walked over, lips tight, her eyes already calculating her exit. "Nathan," she said, voice coated in fake warmth, "the clubhouse is still under renovation. We needed a venue for the Bayside Summer Gala. Your boat was the most suitable option, and you weren't using it." "You broke into it," I said. She waved a manicured hand. "The HOA has access rights to shared dock resources. That dock is deeded to my property. You know that." "Well," she snapped, "perhaps that's something the board should revisit. You're being completely unreasonable." "Unreasonable?" I stepped closer. "You trespassed. You threw a party with no safety equipment, and now the Coast Guard is involved, which wouldn't have happened." She fired back. "If you kept your boat properly licensed." The officer stepped between us. "Ma'am, you are not helping your case." For the first time all night, Margaret looked rattled. The lead investigator turned to me. "Mr. Cole, if you want to press charges for unauthorized use of your vessel, now's the time." I looked at Margaret. Her jaw was tight, but her eyes were darting everywhere, searching for an exit that didn't exist. "Oh, I'm pressing charges," I said, "and I'm not stopping there." By 7 the next morning, I'd already spoken to a maritime attorney, filed a police report for grand theft, and handed over surveillance footage from a motion-activated dock camera I'd installed 8 months earlier. The footage showed everything. Margaret Holloway unlocking the gate with a master key she had absolutely no legal right to possess, waving in a catering crew, and directing them aboard the Silver Compass like she owned the place. The footage also caught her passing what looked like sealed envelopes to 2 of the guests, one of whom was the association treasurer, a man named Gary Simmons. That wasn't trespassing, that was conspiracy. Detective Sandra Rios from the county's Property Crimes Division met me at the precinct that afternoon. Her voice was calm and clipped, the kind of tone that comes from seeing enough HOA nonsense to know when something has real teeth. "Mr. Cole," she said, clicking her pen, "we verified the deed and property lines. That dock is indisputably yours. The association has no rights over it or your vessel." She tapped her notepad. "Based on your footage and the Coast Guard's report, we're preparing charges for unlawful entry, misappropriation of private property, and possible insurance fraud." "Insurance fraud?" I asked. "Your security system, it's tied to your home network?" "Yes, I disabled notifications while I was out of town to save on data charges." She leaned forward. "The system was tampered with. The security module was manually powered off from inside the cabin. That's not an accident." She paused. "Your boat sustained damage during the event?" The galley cabinet was ripped out. Wine stains on the upholstery. Someone cracked the helm screen. Then they're liable for damages. And if any repairs are filed through your insurance without disclosing the unauthorized use, that's insurance fraud. I exhaled slowly. What happens next? We're serving a warrant on the HOA office. This wasn't impulsive, Mr. Cole. It was coordinated. By the time I pulled into my driveway, word was already spreading. My neighbor Linda, 3 doors down, always polite but never one to get involved, waved me over before I reached my front door. "I'm sorry to bother you," she said, glancing nervously up the street. "But I thought you should know. I overheard Margaret talking to Gary last week. She mentioned putting the boat to community use. Said nobody would care if it was just one night." She hesitated. "I could give a statement, if it helps." "It helps a lot," I said. While I was writing down Detective Rios's contact info for Linda, a white Lexus with the HOA logo on the door crept slowly past my house. Behind the wheel, Donna, Margaret's right hand. The same person who once fined me for having my American flag at a slight angle during a windstorm. She met my eyes through the windshield, then drove on without stopping. Pathetic. That night, I went through every clause of the HOA bylaws line by line. I'd never bothered before. Most of us just paid our dues and kept a low profile. But now I read every paragraph like my freedom depended on it. And that's when I found it. Appendix C. Section 11. No member of the board shall engage in use of privately owned property for community purposes without written consent from said owner, regardless of physical proximity or perceived benefit. Violation of this clause is grounds for immediate removal from office, pending a vote by quorum. I wasn't just pressing charges. I was going to remove her. The next morning, I called for an emergency HOA meeting. Under the bylaws, any homeowner could trigger one with a petition signed by at least 10% of residents. I had 23 signatures by noon. Not everyone disliked Margaret. Most people tolerated her because she kept the landscaping sharp and the amenities stocked. But when word got out she'd hijacked a neighbor's boat for a private event and that federal investigators were now involved, even the fence-sitters were ready to act. By Thursday afternoon, a county patrol car was parked outside the HOA office. Detective Rios and another officer walked out carrying a file box and a laptop. Margaret wasn't there. She'd left that morning, telling people she was headed to a wellness retreat in Sedona. Coward. It didn't stop the investigation. Rios confirmed they'd found emails between Margaret and Gary discussing creative use of idle resident assets and how to frame the event as a sanctioned gathering. In one exchange, Gary had written, "What if he finds out?" Margaret replied, "Then we call it a misunderstanding. Nathan's reasonable. He'll let it go." I had that printed out before the meeting started. The emergency meeting was standing room only. Folding chairs had been dragged from storage, and people were still leaning against every wall. Gary Simmons sat near the front, pale and sweating, hands folded tight in his lap. He'd been called in for questioning earlier that day, and clearly knew the walls were closing in. I walked to the podium. "My name is Nathan Cole. I own the property at 22 Bayside Cove and the private dock adjacent to it. As of Monday night, my property was unlawfully accessed by members of this board and used without my permission for a private event. I've filed charges with the county sheriff's office and provided evidence to support those claims." Murmurs spread through the room. I held up the printed email. This was sent from the HOA server. It proves premeditation. There was no misunderstanding. The murmurs turned into gasps. Someone in the back shouted, "She used our dues for this?" "Yes," I said. "And the bylaws are clear. Section 11 of Appendix C states that any board member who uses private property without consent is subject to immediate removal. I've met the petition threshold. I'm calling for a vote." Gary tried to object. The board secretary, a woman named Carol, who had served quietly on the board for 11 years, cut him off without hesitation. "We vote now." It took 22 minutes. 71 in favor of removal. 3 opposed. 4 abstained. Carol stood and addressed the room. "By majority vote, Margaret Holloway is hereby removed as president of the Bayside Harbor Residential Association, effective immediately. All board privileges are suspended pending resolution of any criminal proceedings." The applause was loud enough to rattle the light fixtures. I didn't smile. I gathered my folders and walked out into the night, the salt air cool against my face. Margaret hadn't faced the full weight of it yet, but the cracks had formed, and I wasn't done widening them. 2 days after the emergency meeting, I was called back to the precinct, not by Detective Rios, but by a federal investigator from the Department of Homeland Security. That got my attention. Agent Thomas Beckett met me in a quiet conference room. Sleeves rolled to the elbows, lean frame, the kind of eyes that read a room in 3 seconds flat. "We've been monitoring irregularities tied to several coastal properties in this region," he said, sliding a file across the table. "Your HOA and its board president appeared on our radar 6 weeks ago." I opened the folder. Bank statements, association financial ledgers, a scanned guest list from the night of the party. At the bottom, 2 names circled in red ink. "I don't recognize these people," I said. "You wouldn't. Their aliases both connected to an interstate wire fraud operation. We believe Holloway was laundering money through a shell nonprofit she registered as the Bayside Coastal Enrichment Foundation." I blinked. The HOA was a front? Partially. Most residents were likely unaware. But Holloway, and at least 4 others, used the association's accounts to funnel money from fabricated community initiatives, dock maintenance, clubhouse expansion, coastal preservation grants, redirected into offshore trusts. "And the party?" "Cover," Beckett said. "They used it to host 2 out-of-state buyers, looking to acquire waterfront property through forged deeds. Your boat was chosen because it offered neutral ground. No surveillance they knew about, no paper trail. They didn't know about my dock camera," I said quietly. Beckett allowed a dry nod. "That footage fast-tracked our warrant." "How much did they take?" "Just under $3 million over 6 years. Siphoned through inflated contractor invoices and fabricated grant programs. They kept homeowners quiet with small visible improvements and aggressive enforcement of minor rules. People stopped asking questions." I nodded slowly. "Until she picked the wrong boat. Until she picked the wrong boat." By the end of the week, Gary Simmons had flipped. In his plea agreement, he admitted to years of falsified invoices, including one for a non-existent seawall inspection that netted them $47,000 in a single afternoon. In exchange for a reduced sentence, he gave up everything. Margaret's offshore contacts, her fake identity documents, even the name of the notary who had helped backdate forged signatures. That broke the case wide open. The state froze all HOA accounts. Contractors linked to fraudulent invoices were blacklisted. The Bayside Harbor Association was placed under court conservatorship, and an independent forensic accountant began untangling 6 years of financial manipulation. Meanwhile, the Silver Compass sat in dry dock. The repairs would take weeks. Someone had tried to drill holes in the hull to install a bottle holder. Another guest had flushed plastic cups down the head, bursting a pipe below deck. I paid for the repairs out of pocket, knowing restitution would come. But I wasn't thinking about money anymore. I was thinking about accountability. Margaret Holloway was located in Grenada, Spain, attempting to board a private yacht registered under a shell company. The Coast Guard flagged it. She was detained with her notary and a man believed to have helped forge the property deeds. Agent Beckett called me the night she was taken into custody. "Was she alone?" I asked. "No. 3 in custody." I thanked him and hung up. Then I sat in my study for a long time, staring at the wall. The grand jury hearing came next. 3 hours of testimony in a windowless room at the federal courthouse. I walked the prosecutors through everything: the boat, the surveillance footage, the emails, the financial records. Afterward, Beckett met me outside. "She's done," he said quietly. "Wire fraud, conspiracy, obstruction, falsifying legal documents. We're also adding charges for impersonating a federal grant coordinator. She forged a letter to secure a state subsidy for a coastal education program." "Let me guess," I said. "No program." "No program. Just a shell website and stock photos of kids holding fishing nets." I shook my head. "She's not the first HOA president to go off the rails," Beckett said. "But she's the first one I've seen try to launder money through a boat party." The civil trial was held in a wood-paneled courtroom on a quiet Wednesday morning. Judge Harold Whitmore sat behind the bench with the expression of a man who had read one too many HOA disputes in his career. Gary Simmons sat at the defense table, thin and hollow, hands folded tightly in his lap. Donna and another former board member appeared on a wall-mounted screen via video link from their detention facilities. Margaret's chair was empty, her extradition delayed by 2 days, but the judge ruled the case would proceed without her. My attorney, Rachel Vance, a former JAG officer who never wasted words, laid out the case plainly. Unauthorized access to private property, misappropriation of homeowner funds, breach of fiduciary duty, material damages. The forensic accountant's testimony alone took 4 hours. The money trail was devastating, but it was Linda's testimony that changed the tone of the room. They told us the clubhouse construction was over budget, she said, hands steady despite the packed gallery. That we needed to approve an emergency dues increase. But I never saw any permits filed. When I asked about the contractor, I was told it was handled internally. She paused. The contractor was Margaret's nephew. He owns a landscaping business in Ohio. He was never on site once. A former HOA assistant named Ashley, barely 24, and visibly shaken, testified that she had been ordered to create fake meeting minutes, backdating decisions the community had never actually voted on. I was told it was standard practice, she said softly. I didn't know it was illegal. I know how that sounds. Then came the USB drive. Seized from Margaret's laptop by federal investigators, it contained dozens of voice memos meetings she had apparently recorded, maybe to protect herself, maybe because she'd never believed she'd get caught. One recording silenced the entire courtroom. If we get pushback, we say it was a sanctioned event. If he sues, we tie him up in court until he walks away. Homeowners don't have the stomach for legal drama. Judge Whitmore paused the playback. Has this been authenticated, counselor? It has, Your Honor. Metadata matches the seized device, admitted into evidence. The judge wrote something on his legal pad and didn't look up for a long moment. By the end of the week, the civil case had fully merged into a federal prosecution. Judge Whitmore issued summary judgment in favor of the plaintiffs, myself, and the homeowner class action. Asset freezes were ordered immediately. Bank accounts, vehicles, and secondary properties seized under RICO. The HOA was dissolved by court order. Its remaining assets were placed in a restitution fund for defrauded residents. My boat repairs were covered in full, plus damages. But the real victory was structural. The county issued a new oversight mandate for all residential associations along the coast. Mandatory financial disclosures, annual independent audits, and rotating third-party compliance officers. Bayside Harbor would no longer be anyone's private fiefdom. It would be a neighborhood again. A few weeks later, I hosted a small get-together on the back lawn. Not a gala, not a fundraiser, just a barbecue. No speeches, no votes, just people who'd been through something real together, finally breathing easy. Mr. Roth brought ribs. Linda made her famous key lime bars. Even the Petersons, who had been seriously considering moving, stayed late into the evening while their kids chased fireflies across the grass. As the sun dipped low over the bay, I walked down the dock and stepped aboard the Silver Compass. Her deck was clean. The repairs were flawless. She looked better than she had in years. I sat behind the helm. Engine off. Water lapping softly against the hull. No more threatening letters. No more fabricated violations. No more strangers treating what was mine like a free ride. Just wind, water, and the sound of a neighborhood that had finally found its way back. Justice had taken its time, but it had arrived.